Hello and welcome to the Unnamed Automotive Podcast. My name is Sami Haj Assad, and with me, as always, is my good friend and fellow automotive journalist, Benjamin Hunting. Say hi to the people, Ben.
Greetings, corporeal and non-corporeal listeners.
Greetings to everyone. I'm going to make a quick note here for this week's episode of the podcast. I am out in the middle of wilderness on a small vacation kind of thing.
Sammy's recording from a cabin in the woods. I'm not exaggerating. And I'm also out in the woods where I live. So this is our first woods to woods podcast.
Yeah, cabin to cabin. This is probably, I would bet this is the only cabin to cabin podcast on the internet right
100%. And they said technologically it was impossible, but we proved them wrong.
I mean, I am wearing a satellite dish as a backpack currently.
How hot is that getting?
It's scorching.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of energy you're harnessing through your human body. Can't recommend this, but it does work for, well, Sami only has to survive the next 45 minutes to an hour.
Yeah, or so. But my main issue is I'm having difficulty finding some of your latest publications. Ben, remind me and the listener where they can find your latest work.
All right, I'm going to remind the listener that Sami might cut out every once in a while because cabin in the woods technology is still in the early stages. So please bear with us if that happens. You can find my work while you're waiting for Sami to come back at Motor Trend, at Haggerty, and at Inside Hook.
And you can find my work at autotrader.ca, driving.ca, and Capital One's Auto Navigator. Ben, we've got some SUVs to talk about this week. I think SUVs that promote themselves as off-road oriented or off-road friendly.
Sure.
Is that true? I think.
I mean, at least for one of them. Or, it's a little weird because I think that I'm talking about the vehicle I drove, which is the Subaru Outback. And it's been a year since we've driven the Outback. Not a ton of things have changed. They've made some, I guess, luxury and updates and safety system changes, but not huge differences. But why I drove the Outback again, and last time we talked about it, it was Sami who had driven it, so it's been even longer for me, is because we're kind of nearing the end of the era for this current vehicle. And Sami mentions that it's off-road oriented. I would say, the wilderness trim is something that is aimed at people who maybe want to go off-road in their Outback. But I kind of think of the Outback more as a quote-unquote rugged ride than an off-road ride, like gravel roads and muddy two-track to your cottage kind of thing. And I think that's the image it's embraced for a very long time, even though, as we pointed out numerous times, it has more ground clearance than many other dedicated SUVs, including the SUV that Sami is going to talk about in the second half of the show.
So, yeah.
But the reason it's kind of the end of an era is because for 2026, Subaru is walking away from the wagon shape of the Outback. That form factor is being ditched in favor of something that looks kind of like a wagon, but more like a Cadillac SRX from like 2011. Sami, help me out here. What are we've seen some spy photos of this thing, right? We know it's happening for real.
Honestly, to me, it looks almost like a RAV4 as well, like a bigger RAV4 in a way, which is decidedly not wagon.
You're crazy.
Decidedly not wagon designed. My main issue with it is it's got a massive gap between the C and D pillar, and it makes me think that they might be trying to throw in another third row in there or something, or just a ton of cargo space.
And we talked about how there's already a 3-row Subaru, right? It's called the Ascent, and it's perfectly fine. For
totally adequate,
which is, I think, the case with the majority of 3-row midsize SUVs. There's not a lot to write home about with this class. They do what they're supposed to do, and that's it. And you turn it off at the end of the day, walk into your house, and never think about it until it's time to go to work the next morning. The Outback, though, is not like that. The Outback, it has a cult. The Outback has fervent, passionate fans. I've owned an Outback briefly. Sami currently owns 2 Outbacks, which I think qualifies him for some form of therapy. I think he needs to deal with that. And
I have 2 distinctly different Outbacks. One is a manual from 2010.
Whatever you say.
And the other one is a current gen 2020, but with the turbocharged motor. And I'm bringing that up only because last year the review we had on the Outback was the Onyx edition without the turbocharged engine, and it was heartbreaking to drive. It really damaged my impression of this car. I could not recommend a non-turbo Outback.
Well, in this time around, I've got the XT, which is a turbocharged 2.4 liter engine. It makes 260 horsepower and 277 pound-feet of torque. I think that's 80 more horsepower, roughly, than the four-cylinder, and obviously a lot more torque at a lot lower RPM, 2,000 RPM in this case. This engine, I think, is also in the Ascent. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, I think it's the same engine that's in the Ascent.
Okay. Where it's not is the Forester, right? Like the Forester is stuck with. There used to be a Forester XT, and it was around for quite a while. It was there was a Japanese domestic market version, and then it came to North America as a performance vehicle, and then it kind of kept its performance bona fides in terms of power, but it switched to a CVT with a whole bunch of virtual gear ratios. Things got weird for a while, and then Subaru just decided Forester is no longer playing the performance game. So
that Forester XT was a bit weird too. That was not. I don't think it's related to the engine that's currently built on these cars. I think it was an FA.
Yeah, it was totally different because it was gone. Like I want to say in 2018 or something, 2019, like right around. So there.
It was more closer in line with like.
It was the WRX engine. At the time. Exactly. But
with a CVT, I guess they were trying to gauge the impressions that a CVT with that turbocharged engine could pull off, and whether or not they could get away with it with the WRX, which is what they've done anyways. Right?
Well, the funny thing is the WRX CVT is quicker than the manual transmission because you can just peg the car in boost and keep it in boost the whole time. Whether that's fun or not is a completely different conversation. But it makes sense in some ways for Subaru to back the Forester away and say, look, we have an Outback and a Forester. What makes them different? Well, one of them has a lot more power than the other. That's an easy way in the showroom to kind of push a customer towards one vehicle or a different one. But I want to stress that just because the Forester has this turbocharged engine, every time we talk about turbocharged Subarus, we automatically think of the WRX, but that doesn't make this a high performance vehicle. It's still trying to move 3,900 pounds. And once you're in the driver's seat, it's over 4,000 pounds, so this is a heavy vehicle. It's a vehicle that is frequently loaded down with cargo. So it's going to be working for a living. And I think 0 to 60 is right around 6 seconds. Which is totally okay. It's the kind of vehicle where it doesn't matter what 0 to 60 is, unless, as Sami, you pointed out, it's completely tragic and heartbreaking with the standard version of the engine.
Which has to be like a 10-second sprint to 60. It's so bad.
Well, while we're talking...
Maybe not 10. Maybe it's closer to like... I don't know. 12, I've got to double check here.
13? Well, while we're talking...
It's 8.5 seconds on the four-cylinder.
So while we're talking about the motor, I found it completely adequate, no problems. The only issue I had with the drivetrain really is that, again, like every Subaru out there, except for the BRZ and the WRX, it comes with a CVT, and Subaru CVTs can be a little bit lazy. And by lazy, I mean it revs up and stays revved up, and you're kind of hearing this mechanical symphony under the hood, and it's a little bit buzzy and just not a super pleasant experience at full throttle. And sometimes when you're trying to pass and you get on the gas, it does the same kind of thing. It's not a deal breaker, but it is a reminder that Subaru is doing something differently than many of its rivals. And part of that is because they're trying to get as much fuel mileage as they can out of a lineup that is entirely all-wheel drive. Officially, it's 25 miles per gallon combined. During cold weather in the snow, I saw about 20 miles per gallon. That's not terrible. Certainly not the huge difference.
I actually think that's better than what I'm getting.
That's
in my own car.
Compared to the CX-50 difference that we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, it's not really like a 5. I think that's a 20% drop off in cold weather. So I don't have a problem with that. It doesn't need high octane gas either. You can put regular 87 octane in, even though it's turbocharged, and it's completely happy with that. So it's going to save you a little bit at the pump. But just to say, it has paddle shifters. I tried to use them. It wasn't fun, and I stopped. This is not a. They
are probably the worst paddle shifters I've ever used. They do not change gear satisfyingly in any way or form.
No.
It doesn't feel like when you click the button, a click doesn't happen under the hood somewhere that makes you feel like a cog has been swapped. And I mean, technically that didn't happen, but like it just feels like it mushes into another ratio, and you're like, I guess that's good enough.
For sure, it just accents like the lazy feeling of the transmission in automatic mode. And to their credit, like Subaru hasn't put a sport mode on this transmission or the vehicle itself, right? Like it's what you see is what you get. And I like that. I like that honesty about a vehicle. I don't need to pretend that a slightly more aggressive shift algorithm is going to transform the car into something athletic.
In my experience, though, it's a bit jumpy off the line. Like it kind of wants to get going quickly and then settle into a low R. I guess so. Yeah, as I described with my own fuel mileage, which is at currently 19 miles per gallon combined.
Sammy's so puzzled. I
live in the city now.
What I did find with the vehicle that was a little bit off-putting, obviously, the CVT is one thing. We understand what that is. Handling-wise, the vehicle's a little bit boaty. And by a little bit, I mean quite a bit boaty. And where I notice it the most is I have a lot of snow-covered gravel roads. We got dumped on. Like, I think we had 70 centimeters in 4 days, which is something like 25 inches or 30 inches of snow in a very short period of time. And so I was out in the blizzards, driving this thing around, not getting stuck, 8.7 inches of ground clearance, good winter tires on it. They're a little bit more narrow than what you would have from the factory, I think. Well, at least that's what was installed on the press vehicle I drove. But it was a vehicle that didn't really respond all that quickly to steering inputs, which on the snow means sometimes you're heading in one direction and you want to head in a different direction, but there's going to be some drift before that happens. And I also noticed that the car had some off-throttle oversteer. And I'm currently driving a Forester right now. So get ready for that next week, I guess. And I have a corner coming to my house where you're coming downhill and it's a right-hander and it's on camber. And if I lift it off in the Outback, the rear end would go and it would slide through the corner. In the Forester, it doesn't do that.
Brilliant.
What's that?
Brilliant.
And in the Forester, it doesn't do that whatsoever. So I think it's a functionality of wheelbase and weight distribution, perhaps.
I think it's a weight thing, maybe. Yeah.
I'm trying to find the distribution on the car. I had it up here just a second ago. Where is it? 57% front, 43% rear. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a car, and that sounds like kind of a ridiculous thing to say, but something Sammy and I have been talking about for the last little while about the Outback, and we mentioned this earlier on an earlier show when we were talking about the Signia, Crown Signia, talking about the Camry, is that the Outback is really a vehicle that
can be plugged into any situation.
Yeah, it doesn't really shine in any particular area anymore. And I don't know, like in the past, the Outback, when it was more wagon-like, when it was even smaller, I think that it was cool in the sense that, oh, here's a really practical form factor, but it's not big like an SUV. It doesn't feel bulky. I don't have the same kind of handling not issues, but just handling characteristics that I have with the current generation. And it was unique.
Because it feels like a car.
It feels like a car,
it felt
exactly.
like a car.
And now it no longer feels unique. It feels like an SUV that has good interior space, reasonable pricing-ish, fuel mileage is okay. Like it's touching all of the bases it needs to touch, but I don't know if it's a standout anymore. And it's going to become even more generic once it moves into this larger SUV form factor. So Sammy, what do you think? Like, am I wrong in my perception of the Outback? And is this why Subaru is making the change?
It's very interesting. You described the handling that way. I don't feel like the handling is that unpredictable or unenjoyable. I actually really prefer it, but I think
I didn't say it was unpredictable. I said it was floaty and unresponsive.
Floaty. I also think that the Wilderness model actually added quite a bit of character to the Outback altogether. And I think that helps maintain its persona, its personality. But I am super worried that this next one will go the next step further from being generic. I agree with you. That's what I'm saying. I agree with you. I think the next model could go further generic, could add those elements that we don't like about the Outback, which the current Outback, which I do agree with you. I think it's too big. Like weight wise, I think it got heavy. Nearly 4,000 pounds for a fairly like generic, barely bigger than compact SUV, right? Like that seems a bit over the top. But I mean, I guess other Outbacks, other vehicles in the midsize segment are probably over 4,000 pounds. And we should be glad that Subaru can keep it under that weight limit. But it just doesn't feel like anything's happening under there. And of course, you needed the engine to be upgraded in order to actually get somewhere going in a hurry. So my main concern is I think you're right. I think that the Outback built, and I guess other vehicles have done this too, but the Outback built a reputation on its pluckiness of taking a wagon, adding higher suspension to it in the earlier generations, and then calling it an all-new vehicle. And that meant that we had all of the rough edges of that element, but also the fun edges of it too, right? Like, and then more and more it got a little bit bigger. It added more features, it became more family-oriented, and now you're right, it's becoming a little bit more generic. So where do we draw the line? I don't know. But I do think that Subaru's answer to the worry of oh, well, it's just a boring car now, is the wilderness trims, and not just in the Outback, but in the Forester, in the Crosstrek as well. I think they've done a really good job in those.
You're only going to sell so many of those, right? Like you still have.
I agree with you. Yeah,
your bread and butter Outback is not the wilderness.
Yeah, I agree with you. But I do think that they're looking at the cult and saying we've got your back in this trim, and I guess that's enough.
I don't know. I mean, there's no wilderness version of the Ascent, right? Which is essentially a larger SUV from Subaru. And I don't think there's much appetite for a wilderness version of the Ascent. If the Outback pushes towards Ascent-like dimensions, is the wilderness still going to be appealing?
I don't know. I mean, we have to see what else that the car can pull off, because I think there are off-road vehicles that are that size. I mean, a Grand Cherokee is the size of the Ascent, right?
I don't know. I mean, the Ascent is a 3-row and the Grand Cherokee's not. The Grand Cherokee L is a 3-row.
Yeah, but that's also considered an off-road, vehicle.
I guess, but it also has always been an off-road vehicle. I don't know. I'm not sure where you're going with this. Like, just because the vehicle is the same size as the Grand Cherokee doesn't make it an off-road vehicle. Like.
No. What I'm saying is that Jeep can market a vehicle of that size successfully as an off-road or a rugged vehicle, and I think Subaru can pull it off. But
that's because there's an appetite from Jeep fans for that vehicle. I don't think anyone's asking for an off-road Ascent.
No, but if you get a bigger Outback, I don't know what it is about the Outback nameplate and design. I think it's the nameplate and the design that have gotten people to think those two things add up to be off-road ready or rugged ready or inclement weather ready or poor road conditions ready. And that's enough. And this is why I think so many automakers kind of like pull back nameplates, because they think that that's what gets people, gets the cult back into action. And I think the Outback has successfully maintained its group despite changing every generation to something a little bit further from the original source, but becoming a little bit more mainstream in the process every time, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's the problem when you have a vehicle that's unique and you want to sell a lot of those unique vehicles. Eventually you run out of the niche buyers, right? Like they're just not in the picture anymore, and you have to sell past the niche, and you end up in the situation that you just described.
And again, I think that the Wilderness is the model that tries to appeal to the niche, but it can only do so much with the base trim that it's built on, or whatever, like the chassis that it's accommodating on all those other ends. On the other hand, it does prove that basically like a good off-road vehicle kind of just needs tires, the right tires, and like and a ratio.
But the thing is, like, good off-road vehicle is a weird thing to say, because I think like off-roading is
it's compromised in every other way, right?
But off-roading is such a broad term, right? Like,
okay, yeah.
Does good off-roading mean you have to be able to climb up a rock face? Does good off-roading mean you have to be able to get through a mud pit? Or, as you pointed out, can you just put decent tires on a vehicle and have fun in an off-road setting? Much like you can go to a track day or an autocross day with a car and put good tires and brakes on it, well, almost any car, and probably have a decent time. So tires are like the best mod you can make for any vehicle you own if you're trying to improve performance in one particular area. So it's not surprising that when car companies make the mod for you, you end up with like a compelling package.
Absolutely. On that end, I'd love to change this and talk about the vehicle that I'm driving this week. Is that okay? Do you have anything else you want to talk about the Outback?
No.
Would you recommend it, and are you looking forward to another model?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So I wouldn't not recommend the Outback. I think that for many people, it makes sense. I know so many people who have them. Like my alley in Montreal was just Outbacks and Foresters. They're extremely popular in Quebec. And there's reasons for that. I mean, like we said, it touches all the bases. It does everything you need to do. It's reasonably affordable-ish, especially if you forego the turbo motor and suffer like Sami suffered last year. Is it the best vehicle in its class? I don't know how to answer that question because I'm not sure what class it's in. And again, that might be a question that Subaru's trying to answer by pushing the vehicle, the Outback, towards the sport utility segment in a more aggressive way. And then that means that they don't have customers who are kind of waffling back and forth. Just because you and I prefer wagons, not everyone else does, right? Like maybe that's...
The other thing, though, that is worth mentioning with the Outback is the pricing is so attractive. I think the starting price of an Outback is around 30 grand.
Let me double check. I know it's tops out.
And you're around...
It tops out around 42. The Touring XT, which is the version that I had, is a $42,000 vehicle without any options. And I'm looking at the base model now, and it starts at 29, and these are the US prices.
Isn't that crazy?
In Canada, it's 37 to 50. So it starts a lot higher. But still...
But those are to me, are compact car pricing for those really underpowered models.
It's not super outrageous. I mean, but $37,000 for 182 horsepower in a $4,000 vehicle, 4,000-pound vehicle.
Yeah.
I mean...
Yeah, the Canadian pricing is out of whack, for sure.
Yeah, but a sub...
I will say out here in cottage country, I'm seeing a billion Subarus. Not just Outbacks, but like Crosstracks, Foresters, and Outbacks, all of them. In various trims, various generations, and it's just like there's something going on. Like they've hit their client.
I mean, you own 2 Subarus. I own 2 Subarus.
I also own a car that was built in a Subaru factory.
Okay, so you own 3 Subarus. I own 2 Subarus, but the reason I bring this up is because our 2024 Crosstrack has been flawless, 0 problems, no issues whatsoever, and it gets driven quite a bit. It's a commuter car. So where I'm going with this is the build quality is there.
My 2010 has been completely neglected for about a year and a half. How long has my child been around? A year and a half.
Year and a half.
It has been completely neglected. And it still, when I have to move it and drive it somewhere, it runs so well. And it's so funny to me that it can do it like that.
My 2004 has 300,000 kilometers on it. It gets driven.
Holy moly.
It gets driven 20 minutes a week, every week, in the worst possible conditions. Like I start it up, it's minus 15 degrees Celsius outside. I drive it a short distance, the engine doesn't probably warm up properly, and then I turn it off again, and it's still kicking. So I obviously there's head gasket issues with those older Imprezas, but a lot of that's in the past, and the current crop of Subarus feels rock solid in a way that other car companies aren't in terms of quality. And I think some of that is because Subaru has held back from going all in on like crazy tech features. Obviously they have eyesight and whatnot. And I had the Subaru, the Outback I drove had a digital rear view mirror, which is one of my least favorite technologies, but it was also useless during the blizzard because the camera was covered. I couldn't use it at all. So there's stuff like that. But at the same time, like these are complex vehicles in terms of design. So that helps them stay reliable as well, I think.
I think that's fair. I'm worried that they're going to try to push past this. And I don't know if you heard the news, but they've got a hybrid Forester coming up, and we'll see. We'll see how these all of these kind of technical additions to their vehicles come with teething issues, I think. and we'll see how the rest of because all of their cars seem closely related, whether it's the same engine across the lineup, or the power or the chassis or the safety equipment or all that stuff. I think they're all very closely related, and I think their latest generations have been pretty, as you mentioned, flawless in terms of engineering, or reliability. And it's going to be curious to see what happens when they add a new element like hybridization to this entire lineup, right?
All right. So moving on to the vehicle that you drove, which I hinted at earlier.
Right. And speaking of hybridization as well,
yeah, a vehicle that has less ground clearance than a stock base Subaru Outback. What could that possibly
Barely.
Be? But
I have the Toyota Land Cruiser.
Yes.
Which I have been really looking forward to driving because I am a FJ fan. I love all of the Toyota Land Cruisers. My favorite, of course, FJ40. Adorable little off-road vehicle with this like go anywhere kind of attitude, and has since grown up into this thing that looks like a monster truck, actually. And if I could ever afford the insane price tags that come with FJ Cruisers, I would try to scoop one up, but they don't make sense on the secondhand market. They have, as you mentioned, 300,000 kilometers.
What are you afraid
been modified. And they are from 2006 or 2008, and you're just like, why would this be worth $30,000? But I'm in this Land Cruiser, and as you mentioned, the ground clearance is rated at about 8.7, I think
it's
inches,
less than that.
Which 8.7 or 8.6, I think somebody has measured at 8.6 as well. So that's not very good. Again, considering you can get most Outbacks or most Subarus are around 8.6 themselves, or 8.8. And then you can get like these wilderness models that have up to 9 point something, which would be really funny to see, basically a cross-track with more ground clearance than a Land Cruiser.
Well, the thing is, I mean, this is not impressive ground clearance for a vehicle that historically has been an off-road king. And it's also less ground clearance than, say, the 4Runner, which becomes a huge problem for Toyota, I think, because this was once upon a time a flagship vehicle, and it's not anymore, but the messaging around it is super confusing.
This is a really important thing to bring up. The Land Cruiser in previous generations could cost well over $100,000 US.
Yeah, and it was a big three-row truck.
It was massive.
Yeah.
It was luxury oriented. It was basically a non-Lexus badged Lexus LX.
And no one bought it. It was extremely unpopular in North America because it was so expensive.
No one bought it. And then one of the funnier things I remember is that it was like special order only or something like that.
In Canada, In Canada, it was never officially...
you had to go in and tell them that you wanted one, and they'd be like, "Okay, let's work on it," and then they'll call you back later.
They sold about 100 of them a year in Canada, but they weren't in dealerships. They weren't on the website. I never see them. I can't recall the last one I saw in Canada. So it's very, very unusual vehicle.
I actually see a lot of right-hand drive models. Is that weird?
It's very weird.
I don't know what the story is there. But going down market, the way that the new generation Land Cruiser has gone, allows it to try to compete against other off-road four-doors, like the four-door Bronco and the four-door Wrangler. And I don't know if that's the right matchup, because there's also a new Toyota 4Runner that's coming. I don't know what's going on with Toyota's truck strategy. I think we've discussed this before. Their strategy has been really disorienting, I think. And it's also, I think, important to point out that the Land Cruiser, this one in particular, is also known as the Prado in other markets, the Land Cruiser Prado, or the Land Cruiser 250. And is available in other markets as well. So I don't know if the 4Runner is in other markets. But is that fair to say?
I don't think that should have any bearing on how they present it in North America. I don't see it necessarily as relevant.
What I'm trying to say is the 4Runner has been successful in North America as being the only off-road, as the only off-road vehicle, right? Like in Toyota
SUV. The Tacoma is
sorry.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Sorry. The only off-road oriented SUV in the North American markets portfolio, right?
Sure.
It's popular. I remember they used to sell tons of them.
They still
right?
sell tons of them. They've never not sold tons of them.
Despite not having significant redesigns for a long time.
Until this year.
In fact, even this one, until this coming year, which we haven't driven. I don't know anything about the Land Cruiser.
Well, the
new 4Runner.
I can tell you it's the same platform as the Land Cruiser. So that's a problem, because you ended up with a vehicle.
And the Tacoma.
You ended up with a vehicle. Well, I don't know about that, but it's the same platform as another vehicle in the lineup, but it's radically more capable off-road. And yet the pricing for the vehicle that is less capable is very high. And it becomes a question of, are you going to spend, it's like what, 50 grand for like a fully loaded Land Cruiser, something like that? Or are you going to take that same money and put it into a 4Runner and get a vehicle that's a lot more capable for those kinds of activities?
You wish the Land Cruiser was 50 grand. You wish the Land Cruiser was 50 grand.
How much is it?
It starts at 58,000.
Okay.
And the model I drove was fully loaded closer to 64,000.
This is US, right?
This is US money. I don't think you want to know how much it is in Canada.
The world is fully broken, because I can't but that's more money. That's more money than you would spend on like a Wild Peak version of the Bronco. Is that what it's called? What's the top tier off-road Bronco?
Raptor.
No. I don't mean the racing one. I mean the one that.
I'm double checking.
Because there's a Sasquatch package. There's a Sasquatch package.
Sorry, I found one called a Strop Edition. Is that what you're looking for?
What?
Yeah. Is that okay?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
I don't know what I'm talking about either, but I just found it.
I think it's a Wild Peak is the top tier. It's been a while.
I got Badlands.
Badlands. Okay. Same thing. Is Wild Peak for the Bronco Sport?
Yeah, maybe. I don't think so, actually. I think they dumped the name Wild Peak.
I like Wild Peak, though. I'm just going to keep saying it.
Wild Track, I think you're thinking about. Wild Track.
All right.
Yeah, that used to be a model, but I don't know what that means either.
In any case,
can you tell me what the Sasquatch package is?
It was some type of tire and lift, I think.
And can you tell me what the Strop package is that I just sent you a link on?
It's just some kind of aftermarket thing to tie it to the old Baja Racing Broncos.
It looks great, but it's $70,000, so that's not happening.
Yeah, but going back to the vehicle that we're talking about, the
Land Cruiser.
Yeah, if you were to compare a $58,000 Land Cruiser to a $58,000 Bronco, and then you were to go off-road, so Wild Track is 60 grand. And that's the full hardcore off-road version of the vehicle. It is going to destroy the Land Cruiser in every possible category once you leave the pavement behind. And that to me,
I think in general the capability will be. I think the vehicles will be able to handle what they're supposed to do. They'll do what they're supposed to do, but I think you'll probably have a way easier time.
No, I strong disagree with you. I don't think these are comparable vehicles at that price point.
Actually, the more I think about it, I don't think this had like rock rails.
It doesn't have anything. It has very little skid plating. It's not a serious off-road vehicle. And what I don't understand is selling a Land Cruiser that is now no longer a luxury vehicle, but also not an off-road vehicle. So is this the Outback of like off-road SUVs? Where it's
that's what this is.
It's just for
twice the price.
Twice the price so that you can go overlanding and have the badge. Like, it seems very strange. Like a Badlands version of the Bronco starts around, well, I don't know. It's hard to tell because there's two-door pricing and there's like non-two-door pricing.
Oh,
and,
yeah. Of course.
So the two-door Badlands is like 50 grand, right? But I think the four-door Badlands is 62. It's confusing. But regardless of the exact lineup of pricing, a Bronco, which I'm not a huge fan of, I mean, it's like you can get 11.6 inches of ground clearance with this vehicle. You know, it's just not even in the same ballpark. And then if we want to push this further and you look at the Jeep and you get a Wrangler, the Wrangler is also going to destroy it. But, and I think this is the craziest part, I believe a Land Rover Defender is comparably priced.
Okay, yeah.
You can't,
but it has so much cool technology. Like, you can get air suspension to get that wild 10 inches of ground clearance. You get a beautiful interior. You get
what are we talking about
like
here?
rear seat space in a Defender.
Okay.
right? You got all these fancy technologies that make it feel modern and worth the price compared to what you would be paying in a Land Cruiser.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is the Land Cruiser does not compare well against any of its rivals. I can't think of a single vehicle where I would take where I would take the Land Cruiser over that vehicle. It just feels like it's out of time. Like it's a vehicle where maybe in a vacuum it would be kind of okay, but on a competitive market, I don't understand who the customer is.
I will corroborate what you're saying, because I drove it not worrying about these other cars, because I didn't have these other vehicles to compare it to.
A base Defender,
but driving this
base Defender 4-door is $60,000. And if you get the 2-door, it's 56.
That's kind of pricey.
It's 56. What do you mean kind of pricey? That's like less than a base.
That's Land Cruiser money, and we're complaining about the Land Cruiser price.
Yes, but the Defender is a superior vehicle in every way. So what I'm for off-roading, like again, if this Land Cruiser doesn't go off-road, what's the point? You know?
Agreed. I agree with you. I'm going to tell you what my experience was with it during one of the worst snowstorms we've ever had. It was really good in the snow, honestly. I mean, I don't think that should be a surprise. I was running on some pretty good winter tires as well, which are Blizzaks. I think they're some of the best winter tires that you can have on a modern vehicle. The powertrain is not as fuel efficient as I think it's supposed to be. I had less than 19 miles per gallon during my test drive with it, which of course is mostly lower speeds than usual, I suppose, because we're driving this. It's also a hybrid powertrain, which I didn't really think was that effective. It just didn't seem like it was doing anything for the basically the technology that they've thrown under the hood. The one thing that I think Land Cruiser gets away with is it has a tow rating of 6,000 pounds, which is much higher than the Bronco and the Wrangler, which are rated for around 35 and 2,000 pounds. And I guess that's the major element here. There are some Rubicons.
People are buying it to tow, I guess.
Yes, I don't think that's a great mindset to have. The interior is okay. The rear seat is completely cramped. I can't emphasize this enough. I said it with the GX, which is similar to the Land Cruiser. This rear seat is abysmal in terms of rear seat room. My wife sits back there with my child, and the child sits in a rear facing car seat. Both seats are compromised. It's awful. It is not. I just heard complaining from back there the whole time. Cargo space is okay. No major complaints with the cargo space. I don't know. I just don't know what they're trying to gun for with this vehicle. All of the appointments were nice. I had heated seats, heated steering wheel, vented seats, a decent sound system, and the usual appointments like wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. Tons of drive modes that I occasionally switched into, like a snow mode, deep snow mode, which I don't know if it really made that much of an impact or not, but it was fun to toy around with. But I never got stuck. I never got worried I was going to get stuck. I never worried about the size of the snowbank that I would have to park into. And I know that those are elements that make these things more attractive to the mainstream buyer. But as we mentioned, there are a bajillion other options that are more affordable that I'm not sure that the Wrangler and Bronco get better fuel efficiency, as tested fuel efficiency, but I think they can.
And I think I'm
not totally sure.
I believe the Bronco has more horsepower.
Bronco has a ton of power. Yeah. I didn't even talk about the horsepower on this thing, which is, let me double check. Is it 278? No, 326 horsepower combined and 465 pound-feet of torque.
Okay. Maybe that's Bronco equivalent. I when I drove it, I never really felt like it was quick.
No, it didn't really feel like it's quick. It's loud as usual. It's loud as usual due to the size of the vehicle, the shape of the vehicle.
That's what you want. You want it loud and kind of languid.
Yes. I complained, if you remember, I complained about the GX kind of feeling a little uncomfortable on certain road conditions. It kind of like felt stiff in some situations. I did not have that issue in the Land Cruiser. It was pretty good on the road. And that's my full impression. I would not recommend this vehicle unless you just love Land Cruisers, which obviously they know people love Land Cruisers and will spend dumb amounts of money on it. But if you are an off-road enthusiast, the 4Runner is obviously the better choice, and we haven't even driven it yet. And then if you want something that's, tried and true, the other options that have been there for a while, like the Bronco and the Wrangler, are equally impressive. Maybe more impressive. The only downside to those two vehicles is expected reliability, I think, is not very high on Jeep and Ford off-roaders.
Sure, they're also less interesting as daily drivers.
Yeah, so that's my main thing that I'm trying to talk about here, is that this car should be criticized heavily for its pricing. It should be criticized heavily for its capability compared to other off-road vehicles in its price segment. In
the same showroom.
Yeah, potentially in the same showroom as well. And then it should be criticized for its interior size, in my opinion. I think it's not nice. And especially coming from what North Americans were shown as a Land Cruiser less than 10 years ago, or maybe 10 years ago, with that 3-row that was super, super flashy. It commanded the road. It was like I said, it was a luxury car without the luxury badge, and could do anything. And now we're being told, forget about that, go back to this. And it confuses me as a Land Cruiser fan, because I want a Land Cruiser that is capable. I want a Land Cruiser that is a Jeep Wrangler. I want a Wrangler that is reliable. Is that a stupid thing to ask for? I don't think so, right?
Well, yeah, but Toyota's not interested in giving you that, because if they did give you that,
well, yes,
they would have.
It would have more than 8.7.
They would have but they would have a 4Runner problem, right? The issue with the Land Cruiser is that it's priced like a premium vehicle that it no longer is. And it's been moved into a segment where it's no longer competitive, and it's just kind of a mess. It's almost like they just dumped it and said, okay, let's see what happens, which is not a great strategy when you're introducing a vehicle, even if it does have a nameplate that is respected. You look at Acura.
We've been saying this about Toyota for so many vehicles, though. I don't know how we're going to get past this generation of Toyota vehicle design.
I don't know.
The Camry is the one that I can say is currently still brand new and top and among the best in its class.
But not a specialized vehicle, right? The thing I think that makes the Land Cruiser
that's fair.
More frustrating is that this is a nameplate that once meant something to, like we were talking about the niche buyers for the wilderness of the Outback, right? Like the Land Cruiser had a subset of people who were super into it. And even if those people weren't the ones who were buying the 6-figure version of the Land Cruiser, there's enough built-in goodwill from older versions of the vehicle that weren't that expensive and that have this big, huge aftermarket following, that they could have leaned on that and said, hey, are you tired of your 30-year-old Land Cruiser breaking down? Well, we have a way for you to upgrade that's not going to cost you an arm and a leg. But they didn't do that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
100%. Absolutely.
Or even people like you who are FJ Cruiser fans. There's no upgrade path for the FJ Cruiser. There was nothing after that where I guess you could buy a 4Runner, but if you'd wanted to do that, you probably would have bought one in the first place. So
no, but there's a size difference. I mean, the FJ was like a fake 2-door, right? It had suicide doors or whatever, rear-hinged rear doors.
Yeah.
It had a manual transmission.
So did the Pathfinder in that era, didn't it? It's not Pathfinder, sorry.
The Pathfinder?
I thought 4Runner, yeah.
The 4Runner?
Yeah.
In 2010.
When did the manual die in the 4Runner?
I don't know. Let me double check.
In any case, while you're checking that, I'm going to move on to our. We got some listener questions, which we always appreciate.
Okay.
First, we had Raiko writing in.
Last year for manual transmission with 2,000.
Okay. So I was super wrong.
That seems really late. That can't be true.
So, well, they did go to the V8 not long after that, and there wouldn't be a manual with that. So, Raiko wrote in to say that they want us to do the pre-podcast banter conversations. That's another in the growing pile of votes for us trying to figure out how to do that. But thank you for chiming in and for your kind words about the podcast. As always, really appreciate it. We also had a message from Al. And they were asking us a question about the quality and value of cars since COVID. And this is interesting because they sent a link to a JD Power study that claims that vehicles built during the pandemic are more problematic than any other vehicle year since 2009. So that's like almost 14, 15 years of, depending on when you start the pandemic production of vehicles. The survey that they sent out showed that problems had increased by 6%. I'm not going to get into the details of how JD Power tabulates the scores for these cars because it's super complicated. But for them,
it can also be problematic. But yes,
the biggest problems they saw were software defects. There was a 16-point increase in complaints about software. It was 9% total of all car complaints. And there were also some, if you're comparing different vehicle types, plug-in hybrids were the most problematic. EVs had done very well. Regular hybrids are kind of sitting at the top. So it's a little hard to parse all of that. The big takeaway, though, is cars seem to be not as good as they were before the pandemic. Al's asking, because they're shopping to replace a 20-year-old CRV, they were looking at a Lexus RX hybrid or a Pilot, but prices have gone up so much, which is something we talk about all the time on the podcast. And in the face of prices going up by like $10,000, $20,000 compared to pre-pandemic era, is it acceptable for quality to be going in the opposite direction? Like, there are vehicles out there that we would have, and we talked about this, just on this podcast, about Toyota vehicles for such a long time having this reputation of quality, Honda vehicles as well. But if you look at actual vehicle complaints from owners, it doesn't hold up recently. Maybe the last
lately,
4 or 5 years, it's been going in a bad direction. So Al's like, is this greedy manufacturers? They're trying to, there was a big price spike during COVID. They're trying to keep those good times going. Does it make any sense to buy used when they're going into a showroom to buy a used vehicle and the price can be higher than the new MSRP? It's like, what do you do if you're in the market right now? Sami, do you not buy? Do you reward a greedy market?
Do not buy? Okay, yeah, I do think you should avoid a greedy market, absolutely. And I do think that there are some automakers and dealers that are still living in the pandemic era pricing, which was when everybody needed a vehicle and the vehicle supply was short because the supply chain was interrupted. There was a lot of, I think, hastily provided solutions for the supply chain interruptions that resulted in some quality issues or bugs or even eventual recalls. And if you'll recall, there were some cars that could no longer get certain features due to the pandemic.
Yeah, the supply
things
chain
like heated seats.
Yeah.
Yeah, even if I remember correctly, like Tesla just didn't install USB ports in some of their vehicles, just had holes that went nowhere. And I've been told that people are supposed to be getting those parts eventually, but as you mentioned, it could, depending on when you start the timing of your pandemic, it's been 4 or 5 years since those vehicles have been delivered. I want to hear. I haven't heard people saying, "Oh, I got my appointment to get my USB ports installed." Like,
I think
the other thing
cases,
that is worth pointing out.
Sorry, go on.
Well, my main concern is that I think our definition for quality has changed as well, especially given how software-oriented vehicles are now. Yeah, that I think people are surprisingly more tolerant for what would be considered as an interface or software bug, like an infotainment acting up, like needing a restart or.
You're saying people have gotten used to the idea of rebooting their cars.
Yeah, or going to the dealership for like a flash of some kind, or a software update, or an over-the-air update where you have to.
I feel like a big component of this quality issue is not necessarily directly linked to COVID. I think everything that you just said it is obviously a factor, but I also think that because cars are so dependent on software now, we're just going to be getting more and more problems, and that the last 5 years have coincided with COVID in the sense that during that period, software-defined vehicles, which is a term I hate to use, have become the norm. And as a result, we're going to see more problems. We're just heading in a problematic direction with vehicle systems. I remember how I was talking about the Outback. and our Crosstrek and how these are simpler vehicles. We haven't had any real problems with them, but that's not true.
I mean, they also have some of the slowest infotainment systems on the market,
yeah.
right?
So you move into other segments and other manufacturers that are more all in on software everywhere, and you're going to have,
especially the luxury space.
Sure.
Like Al mentioned, the Lexus RX. There's a lot of software in a Lexus RX. Like there's a lot of like user interface. There's a lot of touch screens. I'm always thinking about touchscreens now, especially now that I have a kid and a kid that has like a habit of like throwing things all over the car. Like what happens when your touchscreen only HVAC system gets soaked in, milk or something, right?
I'll tell you what happens. A friend of my father's, not even that long ago, but like 2018, 2019, he had the MMI screen in his Audi A8 go out, and the car was undrivable. Mm-hmm. And it was undrivable.
Insane, right?
But the even bigger problem is it's not like you just go to the dealership and get a new one under warranty. They have to order it.
Just have a pile of a stockpile of these. Maybe they should. Maybe that's what the new solution should be post pandemic. Is just have a bunch of screens that they can just shuck out and put in.
Yeah, it's a real issue. These systems are so tied into screens, and I complain a lot about screen only dashboards because I don't think they look good. But functionally, there are some issues there too. If you're concerned about this kind of software failure, so Al, the answer is not clear. I mean, it's not a great time to be buying cars.
No,
it's better than it was.
It is clear that I think that the pricing is out of control. Pricing is nonsensical compared to where we were pre-pandemic.
But I don't know. I don't know if that's an answer. Like, I don't know to say to wait because I don't know that it's going to get better. I honestly don't know what to do.
And it feels so mean to tell somebody who's currently driving a CRV that lasted them 19 years to consider another CRV. You know what? It will be bigger. It will be better in some way or another. But it just feels kind of like it doesn't feel like an upgrade. And I think a lot of people want to get something bigger and better.
Well, I mean, I was shopping for a Pilot or an RX, right? So already looking for something larger. But like I'm in a similar situation because our lease is going back on this Crosstrek in the fall, and I would really like to pick up an EV, but I have no idea what pricing is going to be like. Just no idea. It's Wild West out there right now, so I don't know what's going to happen. Are we going to end up doing what we wanted to do originally, which was to buy a 6 to 10 year old vehicle that was in good shape and save on the purchase costs and just maintain it? Like we weren't able to do that the first time around because our move, we only had 2 months. And that's not enough time to locate a vehicle. And economically, things are really uncertain these days. So it's very difficult to plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Economics play a major part of it. Loans and the greedy loan business out there that is offering 8-year loans or longer is taking advantage of people. They're rolling other people's loans or other loans into new loans. So that's why I think the market still exists. I mean, the new car market still survives today. But to me, it blows my mind that, as we mentioned, 2 cars today with I think the Outback offers decent value, but this Land Cruiser is absolutely out of control in terms of pricing. It's obviously not the only one. We talked about the Toyota Crown Signia a short while ago. I thought that had pricing that was out of control.
Yeah.
And
I mean, that's another Toyota that is priced into a segment that of one, I guess. I don't know.
In a class above segment, almost. So, what are we all looking for, right?
Do we want the $30,000 cars? I think they're just
we don't.
Are not
yeah,
enough
exactly.
We
want value again, and it feels like we're not. And especially value is tough now because every car comes with the same features. You can get heated seats and vented seats and head-up displays in almost everything, right? So, the value element of cars has changed. Because what used to feel exclusive to high-end vehicles is now available in entry-level vehicles. And now those entry-level vehicles are raising their price to luxury car vehicles. And there's nothing left for somebody who just wants a car that goes, right?
Yeah, because there's no profit to be had in compacts and subcompacts. It's just not out there unless you're doing huge volume. And car companies just aren't doing that with that class of vehicle anymore.
So we hear you, Al. That's basically what we're saying.
Yeah, for sure. It's a tough problem. It's a tough situation you're in. I wish I had a clear answer for you. I really don't. I'm in a similar spot, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do either.
But that's it for this week's episode, yes?
Yeah. Sami, you want to tell people how they can contact you in the Cabin in the Woods?
Yeah, we still have some. Obviously, we have some decently reliable internet access. You can reach out to us by heading on over to our website, unnamedautomotivepodcast.com. There's a contact form there. You fill that out and it lands in our inbox. And we love it when people do that because we get to bring up their comments, their questions, and their notes onto whatever the next few episodes are. But if you don't want to go through like a browser and all of the complicated ways of doing these things, you can just email us like the old-fashioned way. You just send it to benjamin@benjaminhunting.com. Or you can reach out to us on social media. I know social media can be a bit like there's a bit of nonsense going on in social media, but you can find Ben on the filter-filled world of Instagram. He's at Hunting Benjamin. And I'm also on Instagram at Sammy_ha, like you're laughing. We're also on Blue Sky. Benjamin is at Hunting Benjamin there, but I'm Sammy-HA, like you're laughing. Don't get the dash and the underscore mixed up. Things might go wrong. I don't know. The great news is that you can go to our website and see all of our previous episodes. There's well over 300 episodes to choose from. You can listen to our previous review of the Subaru Outback or Land Cruiser.
February 2024.
Yeah, or other times we've even driven Outbacks from other generations. And you can just listen along. There's a little like story that can be told over the years when we've been doing all of this. Ben, what are we doing next week?
Next week, I'm going to be, as I mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the Subaru Forester that's sitting in my driveway right now.
Oh, right. Brilliant. And I'm going to be talking about the Lincoln Aviator, which I took to Cottage Country.
It's been a very long time since we've talked about the Aviator.
I think the Aviator does not get the credit. Well, I guess we'll talk about this next week.
Yeah, I think so. All right. Thank you for listening, everybody.
See ya. Bye.